The J-29F flies out for Sweden in War Thunder. Does it deliver? Let's find out. After World War II, it was obvious to everyone that jet engines were going to be the future of military aviation. Sweden had fallen behind a bit, having focused on the J-21 during the war, and while they were able to adapt the design into the jet-powered J-21R, a new purpose-built jet fighter was badly needed. Two configurations were considered: a fairly conventional straight-wing fighter called the R-101, and a swept-wing designed fighter designated the R-1001. Well, the swept-wing design was chosen for obvious reasons, and had a number of features that were pretty innovative for the time. Saab's new design used aerodynamic research smuggled out of Germany at the end of the Second World War to refine the wing shape, and it also used the brand new state-of-the-art de Havilland Ghost turbojet engine. This was a single-stage centrifugal flow jet engine, and it was a little wider than other engine designs, which is part of what gives the J-29 its barrel shape, which in turn is where the nickname Tunan comes from. The first flight took place in 1948 and was very well regarded by the test pilots. Following a surprisingly trouble-free development program, serial production soon started, and the first J-29s entered regular service in 1951. The first version was the J-29A, which was a basic fighter, and it was followed by a dedicated ground attack version and several updated fighter models, leading into the definitive J-29F, which featured a new wing design, an afterburner, and the ability to carry air-to-air missiles. In service, the jet proved to have very high performance and even briefly held the world speed record. Its agility and maneuverability were similarly impressive, and the J-29 series were, and still are, generally considered among the best of the subsonic jet fighters from the immediate post-war era. The only combat service was as part of a UN peacekeeping operation in the Congo, but otherwise they served with Sweden until the late 1960s. Austria was the only export customer and flew about 30 of them until 1972. What we get in War Thunder is the J-29F, a Swedish jet fighter in rank 6 with a battle rating of 9.0. The jet is too early to get any kind of radar or countermeasure systems, but it does get a set of 4 20mm Aiken cannons mounted up under the nose. Spoiler alert, these are just 20mm Hispano Mark Vs, given a new name in Swedish service. These guns hit pretty hard, but they've got a weird cyclic rate, so you will occasionally find targets flying through your fire in a deflection shot. The good news is that the ammo belts it gets are all reasonably effective, with the air targets belt doing a reasonably good job of lighting up most targets in just 1 or 2 hits. Plus, the plane carries an enormous amount of ammo for the cannons, which lets you be pretty generous with your firing. You don't quite have as much firepower as the 30mm cannons on the previous J-29s, but you have a lot more of your firepower. For external loadouts, you can take some unguided rockets or a pair of RB-24 missiles. The unguided rockets it gets are, frankly, not super effective, and once you unlock the missiles, that's what you'll be taking out pretty much every time. Now, the RB-24 missile is just the Swedish version of the basic AIM-9B Sidewinder. This is a low-performance, caged seeker, rear aspect IR homing missile. It's only got 10 Gs of pull, and it loses its track pretty easily, but remember, the jet is at BR 9.0, so the RB-24's performance is pretty much what you'd expect. You'll find this missile is most effective against jet bombers, or players who are tunnel visioned on something ahead of them, rather than being useful as a dogfight weapon. The flight performance of the J-29F is quite good for a subsonic jet fighter. The plane gets an afterburner, and it loses none of the great handling qualities of the earlier J-29s. Its acceleration is pretty good compared to similar jets like the MiG-15 and the F-86, and its overall agility is at least as good as other subsonic gunslinger jets, but it does get outclassed pretty easily by transonic fighters. Its upgraded engine gives it a really strong rate of climb, and combined with the RB-24, this plane can be reasonably effective at intercepting bombers. Furthermore, its energy retention is a huge upgrade from the previous J-29s, basically thanks to the afterburner, and you have the option of flying this out as a maneuvering turn fighter with its really good agility, or using it as a fly-through energy fighter with vulture tactics. In short, the jet's combination of multiple good performance qualities gives it at least one counter to anything it can fight at subsonic speeds. The main thing to note is that the performance can get a bit sluggish below around 350 kilometers or so, because the plane is heavy relative to the amount of lift it produces, and while it can often keep its speed pretty well, once you lose it, things can be a little rough. If it gets a full up tier into BR10 premiums and stuff, it can struggle a bit. But at tier, or in a down tier, this jet has really strong overall performance compared to its competition. There are a couple of caveats to note. The plane's energy retention can actually be an issue if you're coming up from the earlier J-29s, and you're going to have to get into the habit of using the air brake and combat flaps to avoid overshooting targets. Speaking of which, its air brake kinda sucks, but it can safely drop combat flaps up to about 800 kilometers an hour, which is frankly insane for a plane like this. Overall energy management will be a learning curve, but in a good way, since it's not usually getting outclassed except in up tiers. Taking the J-29F into air battles is similar to other subsonic gunfighters, but frankly, a lot easier than most of them. Once you get used to the plane's quirks and energy management, it has the flight performance to use positioning tactics a lot better than similar planes. And if you practice a bit, you can get the jump on subsonic attacker jets on almost every map and engage them right around the time they're hitting the ground targets. If you prefer to climb up and do high altitude combat, the J-29F will get you there, and you've got the flexibility to choose your engagement altitude in most circumstances. In head-ons, the Tunan has an armor plate right in front of the pilot and reinforced bulletproof cockpit front glass, which can make the jet a little bit more survivable than you might expect in a head-on attack, but it's still generally not a good idea. What this plane really excels at is close combat. Its maneuverability, high energy, and huge ammo surplus make this thing a natural brawler, and the RB-24 missiles give it a little extra situational punch. The problem is, when you get up-tiered into transonic jets, most of your advantages tend to disappear pretty quickly. The MiG-19 is a particular problem, as the thing can just fly in circles directly above you until you turn out, and then you end up giving them your backside, and there really won't be anything you can do to stop them from using that tactic. Harriers and BR-10 premiums are also going to be a pretty rough match, and you're going to need very careful flying and flawless air combat maneuvering in order to perform well in a full up tier. Now, in terms of ground attack, like for close air support, this isn't really much of a strike jet. The unguided rockets it gets are very inaccurate, and you only get 24 of them, and they don't do a lot of damage. The cannons can still mess up light or medium targets, but for my 5 cents, just stick to air combat with the J-29F. Visually, the J-29F is kind of a weird-looking jet. People usually either love it or hate it, and I'm generally in the love it camp. I enjoy the unusual shape, but in my opinion, the paint job that you get with it in War Thunder isn't great. That diamond on the back looks really out of place, so you might end up using some decals or a custom skin. Landing the plane isn't hard, but it's got caveats. The air brake isn't very effective, and it has a really narrow undercarriage, so you're going to want to try and avoid swerving around down on the runway. Plus, energy management is more difficult at lower speeds than higher speeds, since this is a heavy jet relative to its lift, so be careful not to stall out. The cockpit has issues. The instruments are okay, but the forward visibility is awful. Trying to line up targets felt like trying to shoot through Venetian blinds or something, and the way that frame around the gun sight blocks the view is really obtrusive in VR. Overall, not a great cockpit for air combat. To close out on the Saab J-29F. This plane has excellent flight performance, a generous supply of ammo for its cannon, a pair of missiles at BR-9, and generally does quite well as a dogfighter. However, the repair cost is absolutely insane, like to the point of being offensive. The cannons have a weird cyclic rate, and it's still subsonic, maxing out at about 0.85 Mach. The final verdict on the J-29F is that this plane has the potential to be a great dogfighter if you practice with it, but the absurd repair cost is going to scare off a lot of players, especially considering how easy it is to get slapped around in an unlucky up tier. It's effective and fun, but the fun is expensive. As always, thanks for watching.